Good day, and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is David Merrill, and I'm going to be discussing the topic of accelerating RPA in the practical world. I'll begin in about 2 minutes, just to let some of the late attendees join in. While I wait for them, I'd like to also mention that as we go through the webinar, this webinar will be recorded and it will be available later on at www.corbinsoft.com. You are invited throughout the presentation to use the Q&A panel for questions. As I see the questions either coming in through chat or Q&A, I'm very happy to pause and address some of those questions as much as possible. And at the end, we'll have some time set up for extended Q&A, where hopefully we can be as interactive as possible between the questions you ask and follow-up answers and maybe even side demonstrations of some of those concepts. My hope today is that we'll really be very much a full contact association of the topic of robotic process automation, which isn't necessarily coupled very tightly with ALM, or application lifecycle management. But really at the end of our discussion today, I hope you'll see where ALM, particularly Polarion ALM, working with Corbinsoft, has a vision for enhancing and improving some of the challenges that companies are facing with robotic process automation. With that, I'll start a little bit of an introduction to myself. Who am I and why am I here? Why am I presenting this to you? My name is David Merrill. I am a principal consultant with Corbinsoft. We've been around as a company for 3 years. My colleague and I formed Corbinsoft after Siemens acquired Polarion software. And so we exclusively focus on implementing and working with customers with Polarion ALM, and only the Polarion tool in the Siemens ecosystem. Prior to that, I spent many years as a solution architect with Symantec. And why is my work history relevant to this concept? Because before there was such a topic of robotic process automation, I worked very much with the deployment of computer operating systems and software installations in an enterprise environment. So the same concepts that some of the RPA tools are leveraging today to be able to drive disparate applications, I was using many years ago to drive installations and respond to login windows and feature selections, to grab information from one part of the installation or configuration and move to another part, albeit maybe later on, but as a very crucial part to deploy not just one individual computer, but many. And so really with these tools, we were seeking to replace the repetitive, perhaps even boring tasks of many IT specialists, and it freed them up to do other more interesting things. And that's really, I think, at some of the grounding of the robotic process automation that we'll talk a little bit later. But moving on from that, in the world of application lifecycle management, we've tried to bring process automation to the software development lifecycle that is very much similar to the type of data processing automation that's happening. And even though we're not automating the controls, we are making it possible to build a requirements, a development, and a test management ecosystem. So hopefully I'll be able to present to you today a picture of how ALM can become the RPA of collaboration to help those struggling with some of the challenges of RPA in this near constant, as I sometimes refer to it, the sea of change of all the enterprise applications. As good as the idea of RPA is, it's subject to every good and bad element of what I'll call the tool chain that it automates. So today we'll see some of those fundamentals. And then I'll bring in some core ALM concepts like traceability. And to some of you, traceability might be new, but for many of us, traceability is a constant companion in the development of high-level requirements, the delivery of the development work, and the testing and verification of that work for ultimate deployment, whether it's done automatically through DevOps or through more attended change-based operations. Also talk about something that's very much been part of my life at Polarion, which is establishing end-to-end testing, and really make sure that we no longer focus just on one application testing and being verified and perhaps validated as having high quality, but now with automation between these applications, we want to make sure that all of the operations between dissimilar products are equally well tested and have been verified with the same level of scrutiny and organization that an individual application has itself. So really, we want to try to prevent the defects that might be occurring and really, isolate it so that if they do happen, then we can respond quickly to them. So hopefully today we'll be able to discuss these concepts and then see them in a live demonstration. As a backdrop for some Polarion ALM customers, Siemens, you'll see really a very wide array of customers that are focused in data, in insurance and finance, in product manufacturing, such as medical devices, automotive, and aerospace. And many of these large companies, especially in the topic of RPA, share similar goals. And that is to take order processing, claims, and payment information and reduce the level of direct user involvement that happens in some of these repetitive tasks. So I'm going to introduce to you RPALM, which is the fusion of these two concepts together, and hopefully you'll see why they coexist so well under one umbrella. So if you are new to this idea of robotic process automation, you're probably not because you're attending this webinar, but let's establish a foundation of some of the market forces that are pushing RPA journeys into practical application. So this information is coming from Deloitte and Touche, and we see clearly that many enterprise customers have already started some portion of the RPA journey. It's going to increase in 2020, and the expectation is more and more of these mundane tasks will be removed from the human workforce and transferred to a digital workforce, which is managed by the software robots that we'll talk about in just a little bit. And what we see when this happens is that there's enormous return. It happens very quickly when it's done right. And so you can have a large replacement of a full-time equivalent capacity of individuals. You can improve your overall compliance to regulations, Sarbanes-Oxley, or just internal good data processes, while also speeding up time and saving costs. And anytime you can combine all of those, I think that sort of justifies why this is moving ahead so quickly. And all of that is great, but then here's a very interesting figure from Deloitte, and that is that it's getting difficult. And only a small percentage have really scaled up their digital workforce, and they've sort of dipped their toe into this topic. And I'd like to explore that topic specifically, and maybe again how ALM can add to that. In preparation for this webinar, I had an opportunity to speak to a customer and ask some questions, and these are the actual questions that I asked and the responses that customer provided. And this one is, what is the practical application of RPA? Does it focus only on these well-known repetitive manual data processing tasks, or is it very much into maybe an artificial intelligence dynamic growth of automation? And his answer was they only automate well-known data or operational paths. His example was the order entry process. They happen to be a manufacturing company. And in between all of these systems, they focused on high volume tasks, things that were happening thousands, tens of thousands of times, that had acceptable security and reasonably low complexity, such that without a human's intuition, the robots could start the process, intercept a process that maybe began with a human, and then can be taken a certain degree or a certain path until it's handed back off to a human. So the idea of the robot is not that it has to completely manage the entire cycle, but that it can find a good place for its utility. And so what that produces in my mind is this tool chain of applications that are well suited for this kind of robotic automation. And again, from Deloitte and Touche in a different article, they've targeted some of these typical applications, and specifically in this case, and in the context of our webinar, in the area of finance and insurance companies and software. And so in the color scheme, you can see that some of these have been flagged as high probability for RPA success, some medium, some low. And it's really the expansion of some of those topics that maybe is being held back by some of the challenges. And again, that's what we want to focus on. So back to our survey, we asked, what is the level of automation? Is it UI based, or is it largely API or procedural based? And his response was that right now all of their RPA tools are UI based, using tools like Blue Prism, UiPath, Automate Anywhere. And similar to my experience in automating software installations, it can have the ability of watching applications, watching web browsers, and moving the same information from one application to the next application at the right junctures. They saw a future implementation that goes more deeper into APIs, but also reminded us that the current robots right now can really listen to any application's web services and really become that start of the journey. And so we again start to see this fabric of building relationships between the application tool chain, or the RPA tool chain. This, in my mind, was the most important question and answer that we received. And I asked, how is the change release process of the applications critical to RPA success? And he said two things that were just blew my mind. One is that often RPA failures are discovered in production, in deployment circumstances. That's when they know some of the applications have changed. It's a change to a form or a change to a back-end process, maybe an update, and the robot fails. And so they have to then mitigate the robot, figure out whether to stop it, whether to help it along. And then also that change management singularly is one of the biggest problems. I've got a quick chat here. Let me open up and see if there's a question. Oh, I'm sorry. That was, this is something that we'll address a little bit later on. But yeah, thank you. There is a specific panel dedicated to questions and answers, but you can also chat into some of the panelists, and the panelists can respond to those questions as they occur as well. I'm joined by some of my colleagues from Corbinsoft and Siemens as well. So change management is one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest obstacles to RPA. And really, that is an important component for Polarion and some ALM fundamentals. So in this slide, you'll see how can we start helping and solving and maybe preventing some of these challenges. And the first one is to bring ALM to each of the applications in the RPA tool chain. So this is not special to RPA, it's just great process to take the software development lifecycle of an IT company and realize how dependent they are on those applications, and make sure they start treating the application control very similarly to the original software manufacturer when they create the requirements and the tests and the enhancement requests for the underlying software. So we see time and time again, the larger the IT organization, the more important a standard process is to be able to really have control of those mission critical applications. So before we can automate it, we really want to be able to understand things. So in this sample environment, I've sort of trivialized the role of the RPA toolchain. I'm going to focus largely on things like this customer portal that a customer actually interacts with information and sends data. And that customer portal might talk to the claims processing, and then ultimately somebody would take some claims information and then move it into an accounts payable to register and pay for that claim. And that human involvement that we might typically see will be replaced by the RPA robot. And so that RPA robot functions as its own application in the toolchain, but it is talking to one of many applications which might not typically talk directly to one another. That's what we're going to try to walk through today. And the first step is to make sure that everything that's going on in ERP or in your claims processing application or in the customer portal are really well managed, that the requirements are well understood, that the application is tested, and that change requests are processed in a very attractive way. Polarion ALM is all about these fundamentals. So it is designed to allow for global collaboration, to easily connect projects and teams at an enterprise scale, not just at a work group scale. This is an important distinguishing factor to Polarion. It offers a complete enterprise approach to a unified solution for all of the things that we're talking about. And so not all of these might be absolutely important right away, but we can pick and choose which one of the key functions in Polarion we would bring to bear to help solve some of these RPA challenges. So the very first one, and again, one of the differentiating factors to Polarion, is being able to bring document-like control to the underlying artifacts or work items for requirements and design, for testing, for defects and change requests. And so we'll see in just a moment how these live docs can contain the information that is crucial for understanding the context of requirements and the ramifications of change, but still provide for low-level traceability so that as I write things, as I create new requirements, I can create and link requirements to tests right in the same tool without having to send it off to somebody else or process it for a formal approval before that information is entered. And so Polarion offers a very rich feature set around requirements management. So we'll talk about these Polarion documents. We'll be able to use a tool called Round Trip within Polarion to get that information to non-Polarion ALM users. So those outside stakeholders can still review documents that look the same in Word and Excel and other Exchange formats. And then we can also bring to pass some more sophisticated tools like branching and variance management. But requirements isn't enough, of course. It has to then continue to test management and test execution, and providing this end-to-end traceability from the highest level requirements down to test results. And that really builds the notion of a full ALM tool where any process can be modeled, and you can also take advantage of common methodologies like Agile or SAFe, which, if you haven't heard of that, stands for a Scaled Agile Framework. And these are very important trends that are moving with RPA as a way to help manage the kind of the sea of change within a global IT or a global company. So inside the requirements documentation, I'll spend a little bit about how we can use a document import to bring things from Word, what it's like to edit a document, and then moving on to approval. Because of our fairly limited time today, I'll really only be able to scratch the surface here. But hopefully you'll be able to see something that will encourage you to take a deeper look into some of these very important feature sets, which again, help distinguish and differentiate Polarion from other tools. So this is really a good time for me to take a segue from some of the concepts that we're talking about into a look at Polarion. So we're going to bring the Polarion user interface into the foreground and start to look at this, how we can visualize the RPA toolchain as Polarion projects. And we're going to use Polarion documents to explore how one might move from say, the existing Word documents you have today into a more vibrant collaboration framework for Polarion. And so we'll spend a little bit of time just sort of introducing you to some of these concepts. So I'll bring in my browser, and that's a good time to mention that Polarion is in fact a Web 2.0 application. If I choose to, say, look at the entry of the repository, here's the initial page of my cloud-based Polarion server. On the left-hand side is what's called the navigation pane. And then on the right-hand side, depending where I am, the workspace changes. So here's an easy view for someone to be able to view all of the programs, all of the projects that they have access to. And I particularly want to look at some of my favorites. And so there's a couple of ways of looking at it. I have organized some of the projects to look at today just based on the webinar, but I could also open any project or project group, and maybe I would even search for the topic of RPA. And now I see a project structure of all of the tool chain. And I'm actually going to begin with looking at maybe the robot the robot requirements of itself by themselves. And so we'll explore what it would be like to put the robot software requirements into Polarion, as well as the customer portal, which we'll also look at for sure, and the accounts payable or a finance application. Again, I'm going to be very basic in my treatment of this. So let's open up that project. When I land on a Polarion project, you can see the workspace changes, and it's ready for me to very much be full contact in building specifications, planning releases of this particular application, developing in an agile format what might be the results of the tool. So as I move through here, I can plan the activities. You can see I don't have a lot going on in this project at the moment, but we'll see an example of a project in motion where we see clear dashboard information. What I really want to do now is open up this Polarion document. So if I click on the specification space on the left, I'll be able to open RPA robot requirements document, and it will very much look like an endless page of a Word document. So as I move down through here, it has headings and unstructured text, but then it starts to look quite a bit differently. Here in this particular sections, which I have named automation tasks, I will see the requirements for the robot itself. And in those requirements, I'll see some of the links together. So if I need to create, say, maybe a new requirement, which would be, upon completion of a cycle, sorry, my typing is horrible today. The same type of natural language that you would use when describing what the robot will do, maybe before it lands inside a tool like UiPath or Blue Prism, can be discussed and developed here. I have the ability to not just have a simple title, but I can insert tables and diagrams and more complex data here to really describe how the robot will accomplish this. When I save it, I'm permanently making a change to the Polarion repository. I'm creating a new work item and allowing then that work item to be tracked as its own requirement. Much like you see up above here, there are other items which are linking directly to this one. So let's look at this one automation task and say, well, the robot shall wait for a user to submit a valid claim. Well, suppose I want to take a look at what those claim requirements are. Now I'm going to open up on the sidebar some work item properties. This lets me see additional data of that particular requirement. And maybe my goal would be to go ahead and open one of those claims work items in a new window. And so linking between the robot requirement into this new project, which is the claims project. And the claims project is where all of my claims requirements will be created. And so here I see that similar type of document, but as you can see, I have a few more work items here, and but I have some that are very much specific to the claims themselves. This is one of those projects where if I wanted to look at the dashboard, I'll be able to see what is the current state of release and deployment of this particular application. So if I am thinking about agile execution, I can have project epics and allow myself to make changes to a Kanban board, which allows me to move the events of the change management process through, and I can save that directly. But I can also view and see, am I on track with this particular release of the claims application here in my fictitious company? So the Polarion projects allow the owners of this business application to manage it well by itself, but then still to be able to relate and move back and forth between key information about the claims and the robot requirements that will automate those. So we're going to start to build traceability between them. It's easy to create Polarion documents, and one of the things that we'll see here right on this initial page is that I can also import Word documents directly from that structure. And we don't unfortunately have time to go into too much detail there, so I'm going to skip through that. That's certainly something that I would encourage you maybe to look at Polarion.com. We have several recorded webinars and also some instructions on how to perform this. It makes it very easy to move from the documents you have today into these Polarion documents that you would use in the future. One of the things that I also very much like, in fact, those who know me get tired of me saying that I have a very favorite view in Polarion. I like the document, and it's very helpful to understand the context of this information, but I also want to be able to move from that document-friendly view into much more of a database, even a worksheet style view. So each of these items in the document has a rich set of information that I can control. So here you see the work item that stands behind that claim, that claim requirement, and its traceability to other requirements in the claims project, as well as to something we'll talk about a little bit later on in end-to-end testing. So I can move transparently back and forth between the document view, looking at a specific project, and then the item view itself, and be able to make assignments and set key priorities, even assign this particular requirement to certain release versions. So with that, I'm going to move back to the PowerPoint slide for just a minute. Let me pause and see if there's any questions coming in. Hold on just a moment. So there's a question that has come in to say, can team members be assigned to epics and user stories through email? And that's an excellent question. It is possible. However, the key thing is that we want to allow people to come into Polarion to collaborate in the tool. And while I can certainly make an assignment via email, if I wanted to extend Polarion in that functionality, it's better to notify them of that assignment and draw them back into the tool where they can, do the same kind of complete collaboration, not on just the one item that they're assigned, but on the full landscape of information that we'll see here in just that we started to see and we'll uncover a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about. Let's see. I'm sorry. I probably want to clear up the ink on this slide. Let's talk a little bit about that challenge that we heard earlier on, is the challenge of change management. So when we have the tool chain that we saw before, in fact, we can see that the robot might interact with an application, the ERP application, and when change happens to this ERP application, it might affect the claims processing interaction and certainly the robot. So one change could potentially deal with a multiplicity of issues with the robot. And there's a Polarion answer to here, and that is build traceability between these change requests and make sure that all of the requirements between different applications are connected. And we've seen that already in some of what we've been looking at. The other part to make note of is that Polarion is very much process neutral. I referred to safe and agile because they're very popular methodologies, but we also see waterfall or V model as dominant methodologies, and sometimes a hybrid or a combination of the two. And in fact, it's very possible that this ERP might be an agile method project, but maybe the financial claims is waterfall. And to Polarion, it is perfectly acceptable to have multiple applications following different ways to manage the change, to deliver and implement requirements, and to deploy throughout the organization. But what we've started to do is take this idea of Polarion documents and work items and really connect all the items together. This slide shows a requirement specification, which links to a design, a lower level design specification, which then also links to a software test specification. But instead of having the documents get connected or referring to sections, each individual work item that we see here has direct traceability to other work items. And that's what's going to build our end-to-end traceability from, say, the highest requirement to the most specific test that will verify that group of requirements. All of that is certainly possible within Polarion, because what we know is that it's not really just about the requirements. If we look at the software development lifecycle as a whole, there's tons of feedback, both providing inputs into and getting information out of what happens inside the software development lifecycle. It is constantly changing. So almost if I look at a Word document, by the time I save that Word document, in some cases, that might be already obviated and superseded by other information that's stored elsewhere. By putting this all in one central location, Polarion really lets us create and build that application traceability. So that's what we're going to do now. We saw how the different application documents can be opened and viewed together. Now let's build application traceability to go from a requirement to a test, and then possibly even be able to create new requirements in the claims application based on changes made to the RPA, or rather, I guess that would be reversed, right? That we will change maybe the RPA automation requirements based on the new inclusion of requirements to the claims process. So for this demonstration, I'm going to bring back my Polarion view. We are definitely going to look at this RPA robot toolchain. I'm going to open this document up again. So these again are the requirements for the robot. But maybe what really is happening is that instead of dealing with the claims, I want to look at maybe some operations between the accounts payable. So we have here RPA 408, which is the accounts payable record creation and disposition. So I'm certainly not a CPA, and we've certainly taken a very vague and general approach to what really is going on behind some of these complex processes. But I wanted to be able to visualize them fairly simply. Now, note up above, when we were dealing with the RPA robot requirement, we have a work item ID that starts with RPA. That indicates that it's in this project. And it relates to work items that are in the claims project. So it has a different identifier. And down below here, we'll see that as well, that the accounts payable, the record creation and disposition is linking already to a finance application. So I could also just simply open up my finance project here, and maybe what I want to be able to do is create first a finance application to say perhaps the AP system requires independent 3-person 2-factor And so I'm building maybe a new requirement that might ultimately go back and be one of those things that changes the robot. And I might also choose to say, well, I want to link these two together. So I want Finance 391 to be related to this new one that I'm creating. So I'll go ahead and create that. And when I save the document, I'm also saving a very rich history behind the scenes. If we looked at Polarion, another major distinguishing factor to Polarion is that you will always know who made a change, when was that change made, and what the change was. As you can see, this is everything that I've changed to this document since I created it a little bit earlier today. And I can use this to compare revisions of the document to essentially have that word track changes like view of what's been added and what's been changed. So you can clearly see these comparisons as we move through the change process of the finance application, where maybe I have a high amount of scrutiny to any particular change between one version of the requirement specification for that application to the next, because it controls accounts payable particularly. Well, that's all well and good, but now I want to make sure that this new requirement that I've created has a corresponding change to the robot itself. So I'm going to actually start a linking process. And so between two Polarion documents, I can link the traceability to say, I'm really going to look for some related robot requirement that will address this new one. And so I can now move and open up the new automation task, or the robot tasks here. And maybe one of the things that I would realize is that I don't have that yet, or rather maybe I'm going to have a new one. So here we have the accounts payable record creation and disposition. And here we have accounts payable prepares payment authorization. So maybe this would be the right spot for me to actually create something new. I'll press enter to create a new linked requirement and say, the robot shall listen for all three. And so not only am I writing a new requirement right now, but I'm writing and building the kind of application to application traceability that's necessary. Now, why is that important and relevant? Well, when I start working with all of these different tools together, I want to make sure that as I move through this and make the same saving changes, that I'm able to, oh, sorry, let me hit that again. As I move and make these changes, that I can make sure that these items are all connected, and that also when I do make a change, say to the robot requirement, maybe I'd come here and say, well, what I really want to be able to do is in fact, let's come up here to one of these items here, say an earlier created one, and I'll maybe change this accounts payable record creation disposition. And maybe I would have a clarification, and robot will only respond to Chrome and Internet. So maybe I'll save that. And really what I want to then be able to do is open this item up by itself. So again, looking more deeply into that item. And maybe I'll make some important changes to severity and say, well, this is really going to be must-have. Maybe I would want to make sure that key people are going to be able to approve that. And then perhaps create some comments of this is really new. So what happens is I'll have the ability then to save and suspect. So when I save and suspect items, I'll be able to change the priority. I'll be able to come up and see what is going on. And using these tools that we have available to us, we can make sure that we are propagating alerts to the different owners of those requirements. So changes to the finance application, for example, can produce a suspect flag and alert to somebody who's managing the robot, and know that they need to investigate that change to finance and whether the robot requirements necessarily need to be changed. Got a quick comment coming in. Let me check again. Can alerts be managed in a dashboard-like view? Yeah, the answer to that is absolutely. In fact, what I might really consider is that I've been away for the weekend or on vacation, and what I might want to do is land on my personal page. This is my personal dashboard that shows me across the entire system about all of my tasks and defects, any documents waiting for my review and signature, and then most especially down here, potential change impact. So here is where I see those two work items which we just flagged the change to, and that might be a place where I come immediately to say, uh-oh, what's going to happen to my robot requirement based on the change to the finance requirement. And so I can visualize all of the changes to finance and know whether or not I need to make a corresponding change to the robot before any of these tools go to production. Okay, well, the other thing that I wanted to point out is that inside the Polarion workspace, I also have change requests. And very much like what we saw before, if I wanted to create say a new change request work item, and this work item might be update then much like I could link requirements together with themselves and tests, I can also link between change requests and the appropriate items. So I can certainly say that I want to build relationships between those things which are changing and maybe the requirements in a given project that are going to be changed. So maybe I'll pick these three and I'll link them all together. And so now when I look at this item, we'll see that it's related to and focused on also this change request. This will allow change requests to modify and link to requirements, and change requests can link to other change requests, so we really can understand everything that's going on between these applications. Okay, I'm going to come back to the slide topics for just a minute as we come to a little bit closer of conclusion, and that is what really is kind of going to happen here is in Polarion with ALM, we want to make sure we're not automating a bad process, but we're really understanding what that change process is. To the right here, this is a favorite picture of mine. And sometimes, you know, we feel adrift on this sea of change. And we have no safety net without us. We're experiencing the failure when it happens. But with Polarion, we can really make sure that all of the requirements are well understood. We have good software engineering. But then also we're defining and we're verifying the manual data processing with test cases and tests which have been executed both informally and formally. And to make sure that each application has its own test coverage. We want to show that manual test success is really that important precursor to automation before that first automation starts, and then make sure we can control that from that point going forward. And so here's an example of maybe a fictitious RPA journey, and it would be that you know, we might start by a customer submitting a form to a portal. The claim number is produced. The second step is that the robot is monitoring an email for PDFs that were sent in, and it's going to consume the claim number and produce transaction status. And maybe it's then waiting for the managers to be able to approve the claim, and it uses the claim number and produces an authorization number that's used later on in the accounts payable where a transaction is created. It consumes an authorization number and a claim number to produce that accounts payable transaction. And then ultimately, the customer portal might be updated again using this information. And all of this is being managed by, in this case, the robot. And so each step represents a connected Polarion test run that takes as input information from one test and inputs it into another. So this visualization that you see here has a representation in Polarion where I might look at my end-to-end testing structure. So here we see not so much the exclusive requirement of RPA, but we actually see all of these connected test operations. And down below, we can see the connection of the end-to-end test with all of the requirements and other tests, so that in order to complete this journey, I need to make sure that I'm creating and executing all of these test modules together. And that introduced in Polarion an important concept of a test case. And so what I'd like to do is look at some of these test cases. And so here, if I click on a test case, I have a couple that I've selected. One of them is that test case which we suspected earlier. But now you can see that before this AP transaction is created, I need to insert a claim number, which I don't know yet, and that's going to happen later on. And I have a series of test steps, and each of these test steps will be executed and passed on. So what I'm going to do is move from the Polarion test case to a test run when I will get to execute these particular tests. And I have here waiting for me a test run where I'll be able to submit a new claim. So I'm going to go through the process of, proceeding through and starting the test case. And I'm going to say, yes, I was able to log on to the site. This is my actual result of the test, and that's passed. And then I have an opportunity to enter in a claim number. This is where I'm looking at the creation of that claim, and maybe I'll declare it to be a particular claim number. So I'm going to enter that claim number in as an actual result and indicate that that is passed. Now, if it has failed or skipped or blocked, I will be able to respond to that particular verdict and get those necessary test results. And then maybe at the end, I would say test completed successfully. And then pass the test case, and then save the entire test record. So as detailed as the operation might be, I have ongoing test information about whether or not my ability to log on to the claims portal and produce a claim is correctly tested and will be reliable ultimately for automation. So I'm expecting the RPA robot to pick up that claim number and use it later on. Well, that comes to my next test module, which is the accounts payable. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start this. And what's happened is the information that I've entered into the previous test has been transferred and populated into the test parameter data for creating this AP transaction. So the tester really knows that, yes, we observed claim number. And this lets me really make sure that I'm only changing those key tests. I'm only changing the claim information when I execute the test. The test case itself has been created in other forms. So maybe I'll record the transaction number here, and then we'll skip to completion. And so I build this relationship between traceability from all the way from the original requirement to the actual test case and the requirements that test case verifies. Another way of taking a look at this would be to view this same kind of end-to-end traceability that we looked at before, maybe from all the way from the test structure. Instead of looking at just key relationships, we're going to look at everything. And now I have a full view of all of the requirements and the tests and the change requests that are subject to one particular RPA process. Well, I'd like to sort of come back to this and say, beyond this demonstration, I hope you've seen enough to be able to understand how Polarion can grasp some of the collaboration challenges that impact the sea of RPA changes. So we can visualize the changes as they are planned, allow us to collaborate with all those expert stakeholders. The finance application experts are dealing with the finance application. The process automation experts are dealing with the RPA robot application. And ERP with perhaps, as we saw earlier, a multiplicity of ERP applications. And using one tool to correspond to a global cross-functional IT team to bring RPA control in as a safety net. And what we think that will be able to do is prevent the real-time issues from being discovered in a deployment structure, because I get to see them as I'm making changes to the requirements and to the change, and I'm testing all of the applications. And we'll be able to identify those requirements and those procedures which are really open to a broadening coverage of process automation. So I'd like to thank you for your participation today. I'm going to pause for a moment and open it up for questions and answers. I know I've got a couple of questions that I haven't been able to return to yet, but I wanted to invite you to email us, to reach out and ask questions, challenge some of our concepts, and open up a dialogue. We're very interested to show you more of Polarion and how ALM in general might assist in your RPA journey. But I do thank you very much for attending today. So with that, I'm also going to take a look at some of the questions. So let me pull back. So one question is it possible to keep track of change requests that have multiple versions? And I think that's an important that's an important question. We didn't really go into very discrete detail about how inside Polarion one project space can track multiple revisions or multiple versions at the same time. But the answer is yes. Polarion change requests can be tied to a particular release. Maybe there's one that is already in production. Perhaps another one is in the field waiting to be deployed, and another one is being planned. And so in general, a single Polarion project can easily address all of those changes simultaneously. Okay, I'm going to take a look at some other questions. So one question is, can you use tools like model-based system engineering tools directly with Polarion? And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. It's very frequent that UML tools like Enterprise Architect are included with Polarion. And in a lot of cases, Polarion will allow you to minimize what has to be done in those particular tools as well. Another question is, what are the operational platforms for the Polarion server? We are looking at Polarion running today on Linux in a cloud operation. But it's also very common for Polarion to be installed inside a company's network. And the supported applications are various flavors of Linux and Windows as well, of course. You can implement Polarion with a single, very small formed server initially, but it can also scale outward to be a fully fault tolerant and high availability cluster, so that high frequency changes globally are never impacted by the actual people logged on at the moment and what operations are happening at that particular point in time. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for joining us today. And for that, I'll complete our webinar and give you a few minutes back to your day. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to hearing from you.